Hello, so glad to have you. Welcome back to Digital Learning How-To series, designed to help teachers become experts at digital learning. This is Lesson 5.3. Lesson 5 is all about classwork, and this third part of Lesson 5 deals with attachments. There are 5 topics for today's lesson: attaching resources to classwork, attachment types, sharing and permissions, student view, and finding classwork files in your Google Drive. Let's jump into that first topic, attaching resources to classwork. There are 2 ways that you can do this. If you already have a resource created, you can add it by clicking the paperclip button. And there are 4 types of resources that you can add: a Google Drive file, a link to anything on the web, a file from your computer that's not on your Google Drive, or a direct link to a YouTube video. If you don't already have the resource created, when you go to create that classwork, the plus create button brings up the option to create one of the 5 types of Google Drive files: docs, slides, sheets, drawings, and forms. Let's look in a little bit more detail at those attachment types. I'm going to jump over to a Google Classroom in just a second, but remember there's 2 different ways. You can already have a resource created. In that case, you'd click Add, the paperclip. And if you want to create it during the process of designing that classwork, you hit the plus create. If you already have a resource created, clicking that paperclip Add brings up the option to look at a Google Drive, link, file, or YouTube. Let's look at what happens when you want to add a Google Drive file. Clicking the Google Drive brings up this dialog box where you can search your Google Drive. When you search that Google Drive, you have the opportunity to filter by file type, date modified, or owner. By default, it brings up the most recent files in your Google Drive. But if you'd like to get a more organized view of your Google Drive, clicking this My Drive option lets you see all the files that are in your drive. You can switch between the grid and list view by choosing this option in the top right. If you want to add a link, you can go to any website and then copy and paste the link to that website into this link tab. Choose the entire address, copy, choose link, paste, that's Control V, and you can add that link as a resource. If you want to add a file that's not in your Google Drive, clicking the file will bring you to the opportunity to upload a file. You can choose upload, and then browse will bring you to the My Documents or My Files or whatever file on your whatever folder in your computer you might want to find that file. You can navigate and find that file for yourself. Finally, the YouTube option gives you the opportunity to search for a YouTube video. That might be useful for that drive. I like the fact that it tells you how long that video is as well. Something to keep in mind as you are assigning that work to your students. If you don't already have that resource created, you can click the plus create and choose one of the 5 types of Google Docs that Google files that is available: docs, slides, sheets, drawings, or forms. I've got one of each of those open. Google Docs is like Microsoft Word, and you can use this as a word processing file. Slides is like a PowerPoint presentation. Sheets is a spreadsheet like Microsoft Excel. And then drawings is an image creation tool. This is a picture I took from a bike ride last weekend, and I can insert that picture and create shapes, arrows, etc., and add text if I want. So those are the types of resources that I can add. We should also be paying attention to sharing and permissions as well. Remember that when you choose a Google Drive file or a Microsoft Office file, you have the opportunity to choose the permissions. and how that gets shared with your students. The default is that students can view the file, but again, clicking this drop-down triangle brings up this opportunity to let you see three different choices. Students can view file, students can edit file, or make a copy for each student. The one that I choose most often is make a copy for each student. Once I have a a template, like in this picture, I've created a template for this lab report that I want students to write. It reminds them what parts to include, reminds them of the instructions for what each section of that lab report should include, and I like them to have that set of instructions right as they're writing that lab report, so I like to make a copy for each student. You can think through which option would be most efficient for you, but remember that make a copy for each student option is only available before you have actually assigned that assignment. As this shows you, you can only choose that make a copy for each student whenever you're assigning an assignment or a quiz assignment, but not for a question or material. Let's have a look at the student view, because the choices that you make impact how students see these resources that you share with them a little bit differently. Let's look at this assignment in a student view. Here's my test student account. And when I made this assignment, there were 3 resources attached to it: a video, a spreadsheet, and a file. This is actually that chi-square dihybrid lab report template that I showed in the last slide a couple slides ago. Notice that this shows up in a different spot. That's because this file, a copy has been made for it, and the student's name has been put at the front of that file. And then any edits that the student makes will be captured automatically. And then when the student is finished with that, they can turn in that assignment. Notice that students can also add or create a resource on their assignment as well. So they could create a new docs, slides, sheets, or drawing. They could attach something from their Google Drive that they have maybe separately than the template that you shared with them. They could attach a link or a file from their computer that's not a Google Drive folder. So that student view is impacted by what permissions that you choose. Remember that if you choose make a copy for each student, that file shows up in a different part of the student's view. Finally, let's talk about finding files in your Google Drive folder. I'm going to remind us that on the Classwork tab, this little ribbon at the top has 3 shortcuts. The last one is the Google Drive folder for this class. If I click that, it brings up the Google Drive folder for this class. It includes all the files that I've shared with my students through this Google Classroom. Notice that this is my practice class. If I go up one level to the Classroom folder, I've got all the classes that I'm a member of, or that I'm a teacher of, I should say. From the student's view, they would see all the files, folders for every class that they are a member of. And then each assignment that you've created for these students includes a folder for that assignment. And in that folder, all of the assignments for all of the students would be present. And that happens whenever you choose that make a copy for each student option. Let's see, in some of these assignments, there was only one student present when I created that assignment, so we only had the test student file. But I think this top one, the one that's called just called assignment, has 3 students present, and I could see the file for each of those students. Now, I'm not going to get to those files that way very often. More often, I'm going to find those files by clicking on the assignment itself. Where's the one that says assignment? I would click View Assignment, and that gives me a view of the work of each of those students right there. Clicking on it opens it up in a new tab, and I can filter through or page through the work of each of these students using these left and right arrow buttons here at the top. All right, that's it for attachments. Hopefully now you know how to attach resources to Classwork. You're familiar with the different attachment types. You understand what choices you're making when you choose the sharing and permissions options. You have an idea of what the student view looks like, and you know how to find those files for Classwork either directly from Classroom or through your Google Drive. God bless your efforts as you're working to teach students in this new environment.